The ballroom of the Aldrich Grand smells like money and fear. 300 guests in black tie fill every gilded corner. Senators who owe favors, foreign investors who need protection, crime figures who have learned the hard way not to arrive late. The chandeliers are worth more than most people's houses. The champagne is cold enough to hurt your teeth. At the center of all of it stands Rowan Calloway, 41, built like a man who has never lost a fight, with eyes the particular shade of gray that makes subordinates study their shoes. He runs the Calloway Syndicate, a criminal empire so thoroughly woven into the legal economy that half the city's politicians have stopped pretending otherwise. Tonight is meant to be a coronation. His engagement to Margot Denholm, daughter of the Denholm financial dynasty, will formalize an alliance that has been 3 years in the making. Every detail has been arranged, every contingency accounted for. Rowan Calloway does not make mistakes. Across the same ballroom, carrying a battered canvas tote bag and wearing a black dress she pressed herself that afternoon, Elise Calder is trying to find the service entrance. She is 34, slight, with a musician's economy of movement and a habit of watching rooms before she enters them. She teaches piano, children on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, veterans on Saturday mornings, retirees on Sunday evenings, at a neighborhood music center that runs on grants and goodwill and the occasional anonymous donation. A staffing agency called her 48 hours ago. The gala's original accompanist broke 2 fingers. The pay is more than she makes in a week of lessons. She said yes before they finished the sentence. She is here to play background music. She is not here to meet anyone. She has read nothing about who is hosting the event. The proposal is scheduled for 9:15. The hotel's event coordinator, already 3 glasses of champagne into a difficult evening, sees a slender woman in black standing near the photographer's mark and assumes the obvious. Elise is handed a small bouquet. She accepts it with the reflexive politeness of someone who has learned not to argue with people holding clipboards. When Rowan crosses the room with the velvet box, the crowd parts. Elise watches him come and thinks, with some professional admiration, that the man carries himself like someone who has never once questioned his right to occupy a room. He opens the box. The diamond inside it catches every light source simultaneously. He takes her left hand. He slides the ring onto her finger. The ballroom erupts. Elise looks down at her hand. She looks at the ring. She looks at the man in front of her, close enough now to see the absolute certainty in his face. And then she looks past his shoulder at the woman in ivory silk standing 40 feet away with an expression that has moved well beyond anger into somewhere colder and more permanent. Elise understands the entire situation in approximately 4 seconds. She removes the ring. She places it back into Rowan's palm with the careful precision of someone returning a borrowed pen. She closes his fingers around it. She meets his eyes, and she holds them because she is not embarrassed, and she will not pretend otherwise. "I think the woman you're looking for is standing behind you," she says. "Congratulations to you both." She hands back the bouquet. She picks up her canvas tote. She walks to the piano. She begins to play. The ballroom does not move for a full 10 seconds. Then it erupts, not in the coordinated applause of a successful proposal, but in the uncontrollable, disbelieving noise of 300 people processing something they did not expect to witness. Phones appear. Cameras click. Margot Denholm's expression has not changed. It has simply hardened into something geological. Rowan Calloway stands in the center of the room with a diamond ring in his hand and watches a piano teacher he has never met play Chopin as though nothing happened. He does not hear the music. He hears only the particular quality of her silence after she spoke, the complete absence of calculation in it. He has been surrounded by people who want things from him for so long that he has forgotten what it sounds like when someone simply does not. He remembers it now. Part 2. The escalation. By morning, every major outlet has the footage. The narrative assembles itself with the speed and accuracy of a rumor. A mysterious woman publicly humiliated America's most powerful crime figure, handed back a fortune in diamonds, and went back to work without asking for anything. Comment sections divide sharply. Half the internet calls her brilliant. The other half calls her a fraud. Television personalities who have never met her begin analyzing her motives with tremendous confidence. Elise teaches a 9-year-old the fingering for Für Elise and does not check her phone. Rowan watches the coverage from the 43rd floor of a building he owns and feels something he cannot immediately name. He has managed public incidents before. Scandals are contained. Narratives are redirected. He knows exactly how this is done. He does not redirect this one. 3 days after the gala, he walks into the Calder Music Center on a Tuesday afternoon, gives a false name at the front desk, and signs up for beginner piano lessons. His instructor is Elise. She does not recognize him immediately, or if she does, she gives no indication of it. She corrects his hand position with the same matter-of-fact firmness she uses with the 9-year-olds. She tells him his left hand is fighting his right hand, and they need to have a conversation about that. She gives him a practice chart with small gold stars on it, the same chart she gives every student, and tells him she expects to see 3 stars filled in by Thursday. He fills in all 3. Something happens to Rowan Calloway over the following weeks that he does not have vocabulary for and does not particularly try to examine. He arrives on time. He practices. He stops interrupting Elise when she is explaining something, a habit so ingrained in his professional life that his staff notices its absence in the boardroom before he does. He listens. He is, for reasons that have nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with equality, in Elise's classroom that he cannot name, becoming slightly less like himself, and slightly more like someone he might have been if his life had taken a different shape 20 years ago. Meanwhile, Elise is planning a charity concert, a full evening performance to fund free music therapy sessions for veterans with trauma histories. She is doing this on a budget that requires her to beg favors from every musician she knows and call in debts she has been accumulating for a decade. 3 weeks before the concert, she receives notice that an anonymous donor has covered all remaining costs, secured a larger venue, arranged professional sound equipment, and funded a 6-month expansion of the Veterans Program. She spends an afternoon trying to trace the donation. She cannot. She suspects. She does not ask. What she does not know is that Rowan's trusted senior advisor, Garrett Finch, 53, silver-haired, immaculately dressed in the way of men who have spent years making themselves look trustworthy, has begun paying close attention to the piano lessons. Garrett has served the Calloway Syndicate for 19 years, understands the operation's internal architecture better than anyone alive, which is precisely why he has spent 11 of those 19 years quietly redirecting financial flows, embedding his own people in key positions, and building a secondary power structure so thoroughly concealed within the syndicate's legitimate holdings that even a forensic audit would require months to unravel it. The Denholm engagement was Garrett's project. Its collapse is his problem. He begins making calls. The first stories appear within 2 weeks. Unnamed sources. Suggestions of a pattern, powerful men, significant donations, advantageous timing. Nothing provable. Nothing that can be traced. But the kind of stories that don't need to be true to be effective. They only need to be repeated. What? Part 3. The Point of No Return. The coverage finds its audience. Parents of music students begin asking careful questions. A city council member who had pledged funding for the Veterans Program goes quiet. 3 of the student families Elise has known for years start missing lessons without explanation. Elise does not hold a press conference. She does not issue a statement through a publicist. She continues teaching, continues running the center, continues showing up every morning with the same deliberate calm that has characterized everything she has done since the night she handed back a diamond ring before 300 witnesses. Rowan sees the campaign for what it is within 72 hours. He is not a man who requires a long runway to recognize a threat. What takes him longer than he expects, longer than is comfortable, is admitting to himself the full dimensions of what he is looking at. He assigns his most reliable investigator to Garrett Finch. The investigation takes 19 days. What it returns is not a single act of betrayal, but a complete parallel architecture, shell corporations, redirected syndicate revenue, forged partnership agreements, media contacts on payroll, 2 federal investigators who have been receiving untraceable payments for 6 years. The Denholm engagement, Rowan understands with the particular clarity of a man who has just been handed his own blind spot, was never about the alliance Rowan believed he was building. It was about control. Garrett's control. Using Rowan's name and Rowan's resources to construct an empire that would outlast Rowan the moment Rowan became inconvenient. Elise was not the target. She was the variable Garrett had not planned for, the person whose presence revealed by accident that the man Rowan was becoming under her influence was a man Garrett could not manage. Rowan calls a full council. Every major figure in the syndicate's network comes to the table. Rowan does not summarize. He presents documentation, recordings, financial records, the complete picture assembled without editorial comment. He allows the evidence to carry its own weight. Garrett sits at the far end of the table with the expression of a man who has decided that composure is the last asset he has left. He is correct about that. When the council adjourns, Garrett Finch no longer has a position, an authority, a title, or a safe exit from the room. The Denholm engagement is formally dissolved. The secondary power structure Garrett spent 11 years building is dismantled with the systematic efficiency that the Callaway Syndicate applies to anything it decides to remove. Rowan drives himself home that night. He does not call anyone. He sits in his kitchen, a large, expensively appointed room that he almost never uses, and he thinks about the fact that a piano teacher he met by accident has, without intending to, restructured the most significant relationships of his professional life. He does not know what to do with that. He decides to learn the piece she assigned him for next week. He is not particularly good at it yet. He practices until 2 in the morning. Oh, part 4. The climax. 7 months later, the Calder Music Center's annual community recital fills the Hartwell Auditorium. Elise has been organizing this event for 6 years. It is, by the uncomplicated measure of who it gathers in a single room, the best thing she does. Children who started lessons the previous autumn play simple scales that are received with the enthusiasm of concert debuts. A veteran named Marcus, who came to the music therapy program 9 months ago barely able to sit in a room with strangers, performs a blues piece he wrote himself. A 78-year-old woman named Dorothy plays the first movement of a sonata she began learning at 73 and abandoned twice and finally finished. There are no cameras, no press, no one in the audience who matters to anyone's career. The auditorium is full. Elise watches from the wings after the final performance ends, and the applause is still moving through the room like something physical. And she is aware, not for the first time, but with the particular clarity that comes after a long, difficult stretch, that this is exactly the life she chose, and she would not trade it for anything she was offered. She hears footsteps behind her. Rowan Callaway walks onto the stage carrying the same velvet box. He is not wearing the expression he wore at the Aldrich Grand, that absolute unconsidered certainty. He is wearing something more complicated and considerably more honest. He looks like a man who has thought carefully about what he is doing and is still not entirely sure how it will land, and has decided that the uncertainty is not a reason to stop. He tells her what changed, not in the polished, compressed language of a man accustomed to closing deals, but in the halting, specific way of someone who has not done this before. The practice sessions at 2 in the morning, the way her classroom felt like a room where honesty was simply the operating condition. The particular Tuesday afternoon when he realized that the person he was trying to become in that room was the only version of himself he actually wanted to be. He tells her she did not do any of it on purpose. He tells her that makes it more important, not less. He does not kneel dramatically. He stands in front of her in the wings of the Hartwell Auditorium, while Dorothy and Marcus and 40 children celebrate behind them, and he opens the box, and he waits. Elise looks at the ring. She looks at him. She thinks of the night she handed it back, the total confidence she felt in that moment, the complete absence of regret. And she understands that what she feels right now is the opposite of that, and it is not frightening. "The last time you gave me that," she says, "I didn't know you at all." She lets that sit for a moment. "I know you now." She extends her left hand. The sound that comes from the audience, because they are watching, all of them, because Dorothy saw it first and told the person next to her, is not polished applause. It is the unguarded, immediate noise of people who are genuinely happy about something, and it fills the Hartwell Auditorium from the floor to the rafters, and Elise is laughing, and Rowan is not quite but close enough that no one in the room would notice the difference. Part 5. The Resolution. The Calder Callaway Music Foundation opens 14 months later, in a renovated building 3 blocks from the original music center that Elise has operated for 11 years. The name is Elise's insistence. The funding is Rowan's. The building is painted the particular shade of warm amber that Elise chose on a Saturday morning while Rowan held the color samples and offered opinions she mostly overruled. The foundation offers free instruction to children from underserved neighborhoods, ongoing music therapy for veterans and trauma survivors, after-school programming, adult beginner courses, and a weekly open session that draws in whoever shows up. There is a permanent evening slot on Saturdays that Rowan teaches himself. Beginner piano, the same curriculum Elise built, with the same practice charts and the same gold stars, and the patience he learned in that classroom and has not set down since. He is not a natural teacher. He is, his students will tell you, extremely demanding about posture. He is getting better. The front corridor of the foundation has two photographs hanging opposite each other. The first was taken by a guest phone at the Aldrich Grand, slightly blurred, slightly overexposed, catching the precise moment Elise places the ring back into Rowan's hand with the expression of someone who has simply decided what is true and is acting accordingly. The second was taken in the wings of the Hartwell Auditorium on the night of the recital. Elise's hand extended, Rowan's face doing something it very rarely does. Between the photographs, mounted on bare brick, a small plaque reads, "The first time was a mistake. The second time was a choice. Everything built here started with the difference between those two things." On a Tuesday afternoon in the second year of the foundation's operation, a 9-year-old girl named Priya, first lesson, completely terrified, convinced she will be bad at this, sits down at the piano in the main teaching room. Elise sits beside her. Rowan is in the hallway, carrying chairs to the community room for the evening veterans session, and he pauses at the door. Elise places Priya's hands on the keys. She adjusts the position of her wrists. She says, with the same matter-of-fact warmth she has used with every student she has ever taught, "It's going to feel impossible for a while. That's just what learning feels like. You keep going anyway." Priya nods. She plays her first note. It is not a good note. It is uncertain and slightly late, and she winces at it. Elise smiles at her. "Again," she says. In the hallway, Rowan Calloway sets down the chairs he is carrying and listens. He has heard Elise say that to 100 students. He has heard her say it to him. He understands, with the accumulated weight of everything the last 2 years have cost, and returned and rebuilt, that it is the most important thing she knows. That you do not wait until you are certain to begin. That the work of becoming is done in the repetition, in the returning, in the willingness to play the note again and again until it finally comes out right. He picks up the chairs. He carries them where they need to go. The morning after the Aldrich Grand, Rowan Calloway stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse and watched the city wake up without him. He had not slept. The skyline was the same skyline it always was, gray and indifferent and permanently under construction, cranes hanging motionless in the early light, like punctuation marks no one had gotten around to removing. He had a cup of coffee in his hand that had gone cold 40 minutes ago. He had not noticed. His phone had been ringing since 6:15. He had answered none of it. On the glass surface of the coffee table behind him, 3 different tablets displayed 3 different news sites, and every single one of them had the same photograph above the fold, his hand extended, the ring catching the light, and a woman he had never met before last night placing it back into his palm with the precise, unhurried calm of someone returning change at a grocery counter. The expression on his own face in the image was the thing he kept coming back to. He had studied it from several angles. He looked, in that fraction of a second the camera had caught, like a man who had just been told something true that he had not expected to hear. He set the cold coffee down on the windowsill. The door opened without a knock. Garrett Finch moved through it the way he moved through everything. Without apparent urgency, without wasted motion, in the manner of a man who had learned long ago that the appearance of unhurried confidence was worth more than any single transaction he would ever broker. He was wearing a charcoal suit that had been pressed that morning. His silver hair was immaculate. He carried a leather folio the way other men carry weapons. "You should have taken my call," Garrett said. "I'm aware. Margot has retained Breckenridge." Garrett set the folio on the coffee table next to the tablets, covering the photograph on the nearest screen. "That's not a negotiating position. That's a scorched earth position. The Denholms are interpreting last night as a deliberate insult." Rowan turned from the window. "It wasn't deliberate." "I understand that. They don't." Garrett's tone did not change. It never changed. That was one of the things Rowan had valued in him for 19 years. The absolute consistency of his affect, the way he processed catastrophe with the same measured neutrality he brought to contract review. "What matters now is what the next 72 hours look like. I've already drafted a statement positioning last night as a logistical error. We issue it through the Foundation's communications office, keep your name adjacent rather than central, Express regret for any confusion. Her name is Elise Calder. Garrett paused, just fractionally, the kind of pause that a less attentive man would not have registered. The woman from last night, Rowan said. She teaches piano. She runs a music center on Clement Street. She was hired as a substitute accompanist. I know who she is, Garrett's voice remained level, which is precisely why I'd like to discuss the statement before, what's our exposure on the Denholm side? Significant. The financial terms of the partnership agreement have a good faith clause that Marcus Denholm will argue was violated. We're looking at renegotiation of the seaport development stake at minimum, potentially the waterfront licensing arrangement depending on how aggressive Breckenridge chooses to be. Garrett opened the folio. He produced a single sheet of paper and placed it on the table with the practiced efficiency of a man who had anticipated this meeting since approximately 9:15 the previous evening. My recommendation is a direct call to Marcus this morning, before 11. You express personal regret, you confirm the engagement is still your intention, you allow Margot the public grace of accepting your apology on her own timeline. It recovers 80% of the damage. Rowan picked up the sheet of paper. He read it. He set it back down. And the other 20%? The other 20% is the woman. Garrett did not look away. She's currently trending across 4 platforms. The narrative right now is sympathetic to her, the accidental guest who handled an impossible situation with grace. That narrative has a limited shelf life. It will shift on its own within the news cycle, but if it doesn't shift fast enough, her continued public presence becomes a complication. A complication. For the Denholms, yes. Margot is not a woman who forgives visible reminders. Rowan looked at him for a long moment. Garrett looked back with the particular serenity of a man who has already calculated which version of this conversation ends best for him. I'll think about the Marcus call, Rowan said. Garrett closed the folio. Don't think too long. He left without another word. Rowan picked up the nearest tablet and looked at the photograph again. He looked at it for a considerable time. Then he set it face down on the table and went to find his keys. He drove himself, which he almost never did. The Calder Music Center occupied the ground floor of a narrow building on Clement Street between a dry cleaner and a Vietnamese sandwich shop. The windows were painted with musical notes in the cheerful, slightly uneven style of a project done by children on a Saturday afternoon, which was in fact exactly what it was. A hand-lettered sign in the door listed the week's schedule in columns. Children's beginner, children's intermediate, adult beginner, veterans group, seniors session. The hours ran from 9 in the morning to 7 in the evening, Tuesday through Sunday. Rowan sat in his car across the street and watched for 11 minutes. 3 children went in with their parents. An older man in a veteran's cap came out carrying sheet music and stopped to talk to a woman walking a dog. Through the window, partially obscured by the painted notes, he could see someone moving between what appeared to be 2 upright pianos, adjusting something on the music stands. He got out of the car. The woman at the front desk was named Petra, 50s, reading glasses pushed up on her head, the expression of someone who handled administrative chaos with the resigned competence of a veteran field medic. She looked up when Rowan came in and did not react to his face, which either meant she had not seen the news or had decided not to care about it. I'd like to sign up for lessons, Rowan said. Petra looked at him. Beginner? Yes. She pulled out a clipboard. Name? He had thought about this in the car. Calloway, he said, because he was not, in the end, the kind of man who could maintain a false name for long without feeling ridiculous about it. R. Calloway. Petra wrote it down without any visible reaction. She told him the adult beginner slot on Tuesday afternoons was open. She told him the rate, which was considerably lower than he had expected. She told him to come back on Tuesday at 2 o'clock. She handed him back the clipboard for his contact information. He filled it in. He paid in advance for the first month. It was almost at the door when a voice came from the back of the center. Petra, have we got the stand for room 3 yet, or should I use the... Elise Calder came through the doorway, carrying an armload of sheet music, and stopped when she saw him. She was wearing dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater with a small ink stain on the left cuff. Her hair was down. She looked, in the particular unfussy way of people who are not performing anything for anyone, exactly the same as she had looked the night before, only now she was standing in a room that was hers, and the quality of her stillness was different here. more settled. They looked at each other. "Tuesday at 2, Rowan said. Elise looked at Petra. "Adult beginner," Petra said, without looking up from her computer. "Paid in advance." Elise looked back at Rowan. There was a pause that lasted approximately 4 seconds and contained, in Rowan's assessment, about 11 distinct evaluations. "Don't be late," Elise said. She went back through the doorway. He was not late. Tuesday at 2, he was standing outside the center at 1:53 with the specific, unfamiliar tension of a man who is genuinely uncertain how something is going to go. He had not experienced that particular tension in a long time. He was not sure whether he found it unpleasant. Room 3 was the smallest of the teaching rooms. One upright piano, 2 chairs, a music stand, a corkboard covered in student drawings and practice charts studded with small gold stars. The window looked out on a narrow alley. The room smelled like old paper and lemon polish and something else he couldn't identify, a quality in the air that was simply particular to this room and this work, and the accumulated presence of hundreds of students who had sat in that same chair and been uncertain. Elise came in at 2 exactly. She sat in the chair beside the piano and opened a thin notebook. She did not look up immediately. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She looked at his hands first. A professional assessment, quick and impersonal, the way a doctor checks your eyes. She adjusted the height of the bench, which involved her reaching past him to release a lever underneath, close enough that he could hear her breathe. She told him to place his hands on the keys. He did. She adjusted the position of his wrists without asking permission and told him his right shoulder was carrying tension and he needed to drop it. "I don't carry tension," he said. She looked at him. "Your right shoulder is approximately 3/4 of an inch higher than your left one. That's tension." He dropped his shoulder. "The piano will tell me things about you," she said. "That's just how it works. You can't hide bad habits on a keyboard because every mistake produces a sound. Some people find that embarrassing." She turned back to her notebook. "I find it useful. I'm not embarrassed easily." "We'll see." She wrote something down. "What's your goal?" "I want to play something recognizable by the end of the month. That depends entirely on how much you practice." She looked up. "I give everyone the same expectation, 3 sessions per week, minimum 20 minutes each. Not because you'll get much done in 20 minutes, but because the habit matters more than the duration at this stage. I give everyone the same practice chart." She reached to the corkboard and unpinned a laminated sheet printed with a simple grid, dates, checkboxes, a row of small empty star shapes along the bottom. "When you come in on Thursday, I want 3 stars filled in. You earn a star for each practice session." He looked at the chart. "These are the same ones the children use," he said. "Yes." She did not apologize for this. "They work." The lesson lasted 50 minutes. She did not treat him differently from anyone else in her building, which was either a deliberate choice or genuine indifference, and he could not immediately tell which. She was direct to the point of bluntness, corrected him without softening the correction, and twice told him he was thinking too hard, which was not a thing anyone had said to him in recent memory. She was also patient in the specific way of people who are patient because they believe in the process, rather than because they are managing someone's feelings. When the lesson ended, she stood up and made a note in the thin notebook. "Thursday," she said, "I'll be here." She was almost at the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame and looked back at him. "Why are you really here, Mr. Calloway?" He considered several answers. He discarded all of them except the one that was true. "I don't know yet," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded, as though this were an acceptable answer, possibly the only acceptable answer, and she left him alone in the small room with the upright piano and the corkboard full of gold stars. He sat there for another 5 minutes. Then he placed his hands back on the keys and played the exercise she had shown him, slowly, badly, making every mistake she had told him he would make. He played it again. He played it a 3rd time. On Thursday, he came back with all 3 stars filled in. She raised one eyebrow. She gave him a new chart. He did not see Garrett Finch until Friday evening, when Garrett appeared at the door of his private office on the 31st floor with the folio and the particular expression of a man who has been composing his words since the previous Tuesday. "You enrolled in piano lessons," Garrett said. "I did." "At her school?" "Yes." Garrett sat down without being invited. He opened the folio. He placed a printout on the desk. A photograph, slightly grainy, taken with a long lens from somewhere across Clement Street. Rowan arriving at the music center on Tuesday afternoon. Rowan looked at the photograph. He looked at Garrett. "You had someone watching the school," he said. "I had someone keeping an eye on a situation that has significant implications for this organization." Garrett's voice remained exactly what it always was. Measured, reasonable, in the tone of a man explaining arithmetic to someone capable of understanding it. "Marcus Denholm called me directly on Wednesday morning. He does not yet know about the lessons. When he does, then I'll deal with Marcus. The engagement is currently not your concern." The silence between them had a different quality than their usual silences. Garrett recognized it. He was too experienced not to. He closed the folio. "You're making a decision," he said. "I'm taking piano lessons." Rowan. And there it was, the use of the given name, which Garrett deployed rarely and with surgical precision, the equivalent of another man raising his voice. "I have spent 19 years protecting this organization's interests. Every alliance, every agreement, every political relationship we currently hold exists because decisions were made with discipline. The Denholm Partnership is worth $400 million over 7 years, and the political coverage of 2 separate city council seats. What is happening on Clement Street is worth a practice chart with gold stars." Garrett stopped. "I'm aware of what I'm doing," Rowan said. "Go home, Garrett." Garrett stood. He picked up the folio. At the door he paused and turned back, and for just a moment, briefer than the pause earlier in the week, but registered with the same precision, something moved behind his eyes that was not the measured neutrality Rowan had known for 19 years. "She won't stay uncomplicated," Garrett said. "People don't." He left. Rowan sat alone in the office. He picked up the long lens photograph and looked at it. Himself, mid-stride, crossing Clement Street in the early afternoon light. He looked, in this image, more like himself than he had in the photograph from the Aldrich Grand, or perhaps less like himself. He was no longer certain those were different things. He put the photograph in the center drawer and locked it. The Veterans Concert came together over the following 3 weeks, with the specific organized chaos of a project run by someone who has learned to function on enthusiasm, competence, and the strategic deployment of favors owed. Elise worked the phones from 7 in the morning, borrowed lighting equipment from a college theater department, called in a sound engineer who owed her from a benefit concert 3 years earlier, and designed the program herself on a laptop that was visibly struggling with the task. Rowan watched all of this from the particular vantage point of someone who attends Tuesday and Thursday lessons and says nothing beyond what is directly relevant to the exercises she assigns him. He was getting better. Not quickly. Not in the smooth, accelerating way that people who have not actually tried to learn an instrument imagine it works. He was getting better in the grinding, incremental, occasionally humiliating way of someone who is genuinely starting from the beginning, making the same mistakes repeatedly and slowly making them less frequently. Elise marked his progress in the notebook with the same spare notation she used for everyone. She did not praise him effusively. When he got something right, she said so briefly, and moved on. He found himself practicing at 11 o'clock at night in his apartment, which contained a piano he had owned for 12 years and played approximately 4 times, using it primarily as a surface for architectural drawings and occasionally mail. On the Thursday of the 3rd week, he arrived at 2 in the afternoon and found the center in low-grade crisis. One of the sound technicians for the upcoming concert had canceled. The borrowed lighting rig had a failed component that would cost $200 to replace, a sum that the center's current event budget did not have without pulling from the general fund, which Elise had told Petra she was not willing to do. A parent of one of the children's students had called to ask, with the careful framing of someone who had been reading things online, whether there was going to be media attention at the concert, because she wasn't sure she wanted her daughter photographed. Elise was on the phone when Rowan walked in. She held up one finger without looking at him and continued the conversation, which was with the venue's operations manager and concerned a loading dock access issue that had apparently been unresolved since the previous week. She handled it with the compressed efficiency of someone managing 6 parallel problems and treating each one as the only problem. She ended the call. She looked at her notebook. She looked at him. "You're exactly on time," she said. "Good." She picked up her bag from the chair. "Walk with me. I need to check on the venue, and I can talk and walk. He followed her out onto Clement Street. She walked the way she did everything, without apparent hurry, and at a pace that required him to adjust his usual stride. She told him the lighting issue while they waited for a light to change. She told him about the sound technician while they crossed the street. By the time they reached the next block, she had moved on to a problem with the printed programs, the wrong address on the back page, already at the printer, and the question of whether to reprint or simply use stickers. "How much is the reprint?" he asked. $340. No. She said it without heat, without pause, with the same tone she used when correcting his hand position. "Thank you. No." "Why?" "Because I've been running this center for 11 years without covering operational costs with donor money I can't account for in the budget. If I start now, I won't stop." She looked at him sideways. "We'll use stickers." "It's fine. People have found venues with worse information than a sticker." He was quiet for half a block. "The anonymous donation," he said. She was quiet for slightly longer than he expected. "That was different," she said. "How?" "That went to the Veterans Program, directly. It expanded something that needed expanding and couldn't wait for a grant cycle." She kept walking. "The programs are the point. The stickers aren't the point." He thought about that. "You know it was me," he said. "I suspected," she said. "I didn't ask because I didn't want to have this conversation until you brought it up." She stopped outside a building with a venue marquee above the door. She turned to face him. "Was there a condition attached to it?" "No." She studied him. He had become, over the past 3 weeks, more accustomed to being studied by her. She had a quality of attention that was direct without being aggressive, the look of someone gathering information rather than rendering judgment. "Okay," she said. "That's it? What else do you want me to say?" She turned back to the door. "Come in. I need to look at the loading dock." He followed her inside. The venue walkthrough took 40 minutes, during which Elise spoke with 4 different staff members, identified 2 additional logistical problems, solved one of them on the spot, and scheduled a call to address the second, and approved the layout of the main floor seating with a revision to the front row configuration that the events coordinator seemed genuinely grateful for. Rowan stood slightly behind her and watched her work. He had been in rooms with effective people his entire adult life. He had run a criminal empire for 15 years on the strength of his ability to identify competence and deploy it correctly. He knew the difference between performance and capacity. Elise Calder, standing in the middle of a half-lit concert venue, arguing pleasantly but immovably about sightlines, had more operational competence per square inch than most of the people on his payroll. He did not tell her this. He understood, with the particular intelligence that had kept him at the top of an organization that regularly consumed its own leaders, that telling her would accomplish nothing useful. On the way back to the center, she asked him about the piece she'd assigned him. He told her honestly that the transition in the second measure was still fighting him. "Your left hand doesn't trust your right hand yet," she said. "That's not a technical problem. That's a coordination problem. You have to slow it down until both hands believe they're doing the same piece. They are doing the same piece. Your hands don't know that." She glanced at him. "How often are you practicing?" "Most evenings." "How long?" 40 minutes, sometimes longer." She stopped walking. She looked at him with an expression he had not seen from her before. Not surprise exactly, but a recalibration. Like she had been holding one version of something and was now holding a slightly different version of the same thing. "That's more than I asked for," she said. "I'm aware." She started walking again. She didn't say anything else about it. That evening, Garrett Finch had dinner with Marcus Denholm at a restaurant in the financial district that neither of them had chosen for its food. Marcus was 62, heavy through the shoulders, with the complexion of a man who had spent 30 years making decisions under artificial light. He ate without looking at his plate. He looked at Garrett. "Tell me where we stand," Marcus said. "The situation is more fluid than I'd like," Garrett said. He cut his food with precision. "Rowan is taking time." "Taking time?" Marcus's voice was flat. "My daughter is not taking time, Garrett. My daughter is in a hotel suite in Palm Beach with her publicist and her attorney, and a temperament that I haven't seen in her since she was 14 years old." "I understand." "The Seaport stake remains intact. Nothing formal has moved." "Yet." Marcus set his fork down. He had a way of setting things down that communicated finality. "I've known Rowan Calloway for 11 years. I have never seen him make a decision from sentiment. What is this woman? A complication, Garrett said, that I'm managing. You're managing it by letting him walk into her building twice a week? Garrett met his eyes. I'm managing it carefully. Rowan responds badly to pressure on matters he's decided to treat as personal. If I push him directly on this, he pushes back and the damage is worse. What I need from you is time. How much time? 3 weeks. Possibly 4. Marcus picked up his fork again. He ate a piece of steak. He chewed it. He swallowed. 3 weeks, he said. And then Margot comes home from Palm Beach, and there is a public statement, and we resume the original arrangement. That's my goal. Your goal, Marcus said, with a softness that was somehow more threatening than volume, needs to become a result. Garrett drove home that night along the waterfront. He sat in the car after he parked it for 4 minutes, watching the lights on the water. His phone had 17 messages. He answered none of them. He opened a contact in his phone that was listed under a single initial, V. He typed a message. He sent it. He put the phone in his jacket pocket and got out of the car. In the second week after the conversation at the venue, the first story appeared. It ran on a local entertainment site, the kind of outlet that sustained itself on celebrity-adjacent content and the particular appetite of an audience that had learned to enjoy the architecture of a reputation being quietly disassembled. The piece did not name sources. It described, in the language of informed speculation, a pattern. Powerful men, significant sums, a woman with a talent for appearing in the right rooms at the right moments. It mentioned the gala. It mentioned the anonymous donation to the Veterans Program. It did not state anything directly enough to constitute a claim. It did not need to. By the following morning, the piece had been picked up and reframed 3 times. By Tuesday afternoon, a television segment had added a chyron that read, "Music teacher's mysterious benefactor," a sentence that managed to be both technically inaccurate and functionally devastating. Elise was in room 3 when Rowan arrived for his lesson. She was sitting with her hands in her lap and her phone face down on the piano lid, and she was looking at the corkboard with the particular focus of someone who is not actually looking at anything. He sat down. She picked up the notebook. "Left hand," she said. "From measure 1. He played. She listened. She corrected the second measure without referencing anything outside the room. Halfway through the lesson, without looking up from the notebook, she said, "Did you see it?" "Yes." "Did you know it was coming?" He did not answer immediately. She looked up. "No," he said. She studied him. That same quality of attention, gathering, not judging. "I believe you," she said. She looked back down at the notebook. "Measure 3. Again." He played measure 3. That evening, he called his investigator for the first time and said a single sentence. "I want to know where that story came from." And then this following Friday morning, a parent of one of Elise's students walked into the center and asked Petra, in the careful voice of someone who had been talking to other parents, whether there was going to be additional media attention around the center in the near future. Petra told her she wasn't sure. The parent picked up her daughter's sheet music from the desk and said she would be in touch about rescheduling and left without making eye contact with Petra again. Elise heard about it 20 minutes later. She stood in the doorway of the back office and looked at the empty front desk and the chair where the parent had been sitting and said nothing for a long time. Petra watched her. "Elise? How many?" Elise said. Petra was quiet for a moment. "2 calls this week," she said. "1 in person." Elise nodded. She turned and went back into the office and sat down at the desk and opened her laptop and stared at the screen without typing anything. At his Tuesday lesson, Rowan arrived to find her already in room 3, already playing. Not a student exercise, but something of her own. A piece he didn't recognize that had a quality he couldn't name, unhurried and without resolution, like a question being asked in a language he was only beginning to learn. She stopped when he sat down. "Tell me what you've been practicing," she said. He told her. She took him through the lesson with the same precision she always brought. She corrected him. She noted his progress. And there was progress. He could feel it, the way the keys were beginning to feel less foreign under his hands, the way his left and right hands were beginning to negotiate rather than compete. At the end of the session, she closed the notebook. 3 families, she said. He looked at her. 3 families have called this week about pausing lessons. Her voice was steady. 2 of them have been with us for 4 years. She looked at him directly. I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm telling you because I think you should know what's happening. Elise, I'm not done. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. I built this center from a single room and a used upright and 11 students. I have never once asked for anything from anyone that I couldn't account for in my budget and my program report and my own conscience. She paused. I am not going to apologize for something I didn't do, and I'm not going to defend myself against a story that doesn't name me directly because that would give it more substance than it deserves. She stood up. But I need you to understand the cost. Not to the organization with $400 million in seaport development. To the 9-year-old whose parents are now wondering whether this school is the right place for her. The room was very quiet. I'm going to find out who ran that story, Rowan said. I know you are. She picked up her notebook. That's not what I'm asking you to do. She paused at the door. Thursday at 2. Don't be late. She left. He sat alone in room 3 for a long time. The upright piano in front of him was old and slightly out of tune on the high register and had a small crack in the veneer on the upper left corner that someone had repaired neatly with wood glue. He put his hands on the keys. He played the piece she had assigned him. He played it from the beginning, slowly, all the way through, making fewer mistakes than he had made the week before. Then he took out his phone and called his investigator and said, "How long until you have something solid?" The investigator said, "End of the week. Maybe sooner." Rowan said, "Make it sooner." He put the phone away. He played the piece again. In a glass and steel building 4 blocks from the waterfront, Garrett Finch sat at his own desk. A desk that no one in the Callaway organization would have recognized, in an office that no one in the Callaway organization knew he maintained, and opened a laptop that was not connected to any of the Callaway network's servers. He reviewed 3 documents. He sent 2 messages to addresses that would route through 4 different servers before reaching their recipients. He transferred a number from one account to another with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this particular thing several hundred times. Then he closed the laptop. He looked out the window at the same city Rowan had looked at from the penthouse. He had been building this for 11 years. He had been patient in the specific way that people are patient when they understand that the timing matters more than the speed. He had placed his people carefully. He had built his financial architecture inside Rowan's with the meticulous care of a man who understood that the best concealment is structural, not hidden behind walls but woven into the walls themselves. The piano teacher was a problem he had not anticipated, not because she was powerful, not because she had resources or connections or any of the things that typically constituted a threat. She was a problem because she was changing the specific variable that his entire structure depended on. She was changing Rowan. He had managed Rowan's instincts for 19 years by understanding them better than Rowan did. He knew when to present information and when to withhold it. He knew which pressures Rowan would fold to and which would make him rigid. He knew the precise architecture of Rowan's self-image, the carefully maintained belief that every decision was strategic, that sentiment was a luxury that belonged to other men, that the organization's interests and his own were identical. What he could not manage was a man who was beginning to notice the gap between who he was and who he might have been. That gap, Garrett understood with the cold clarity of someone who had spent 19 years thinking about leverage, was the only thing that could actually destroy what he had built. He picked up his phone. He called a number. When the voice on the other end answered, Garrett said, "We need to accelerate the timeline on the media package, and I need you to pull the financial records on the Clement Street property, the music center." He paused. "All of them." He hung up. He looked at the window for another moment. Then he opened the laptop again because there was still work to do, and Garrett Finch had never in his professional life allowed sentiment or doubt or the distant possibility that he might be wrong to interfere with the work. Friday afternoon, Rowan's investigator delivered a preliminary report. Rowan read it standing in his kitchen at 6 in the evening, still in his coat, with the particular stillness of a man processing something that confirms what he already suspected but is worse than he had allowed himself to fully imagine. The entertainment site had received the initial story through a media contact who traced back, through 2 intermediaries, to a communications consultancy that Garrett Finch had been retaining for 7 years under a corporate name that did not appear anywhere in the Callaway organization's disclosed holdings. The same consultancy had been responsible for two separate reputation management campaigns in the previous 4 years, both targeting individuals who had, in the months preceding the campaigns, come into closer contact with Rowan than Garrett found comfortable. One of those individuals had left the city. The other had stopped doing business in any sector where the Calloway name carried weight. Rowan set the report on the kitchen counter. He stood there for a moment with his hand flat on the paper and his eyes fixed on the middle distance where there was nothing to look at, because what he was looking at was not in the room. He picked up his phone. He called his investigator. "How deep does it go?" he said. The investigator's pause lasted long enough to tell him everything before the words arrived. "Deep," the investigator said. "I need another 72 hours to be sure of the full scope. But Rowan, the seaport accounts, the ones under the infrastructure subsidiary. What about them?" "There are transfers going out that aren't in any ledger I've been given access to. Significant transfers. The routing is complex, but I've traced two of them to shell entities that don't appear in any Calloway filing. The earliest one I can find goes back 9 years. The kitchen was completely quiet. "Pull everything," Rowan said. "Every account, every subsidiary, every transaction you can access. And I want eyes on Garrett Finch, now. Not surveillance. Eyes. I want to know where he goes and who he sees." He ended the call. He stood in the kitchen. He thought about 19 years. He thought about every conversation, every decision, every alliance he had believed he was building from a position of complete information, and he began for the first time to take those decisions apart and look at them from a different angle. The view from that angle was not comfortable. He thought about Elise's face when she told him about the three families, the absolute absence of self-pity in it. The way she had told him, not because she wanted him to fix it, but because she thought he should know the cost. He picked up the report again. He turned to the third page. At the bottom, flagged in his investigator's shorthand, was a single note. CF contact with Denholm, M. Private channel, not through org. Established 6 contacts in past 60 days. Topic unknown. Rowan read it twice. Then he understood. Not just the story. Not just the smear campaign against Elise. The Denholm engagement itself, the alliance he had believed was a strategic decision he had made, the partnership he had spent 3 years building toward, came back to him now from the new angle. And from that angle it looked entirely different, and in its different shape he could see, with the grinding clarity of a man who has just discovered that the room he thought he was standing in is not the room he has been standing in for the past 11 years, the complete outline of what Garrett Finch had actually been building, and where Rowan sat in it. He set the report down on the counter. He stood very still for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called a number he had not called in 3 years, the private line for Cosimo Reyes, who ran the Eastern Network and owed Rowan 2 significant favors and had no connection to Garrett Finch that Rowan's investigator had not already verified. "I need an emergency counsel," Rowan said when Cosimo answered. "Full attendance, 3 days. And Cosimo, it goes through you, not through my office." A pause. "How serious?" Cosimo said. Rowan looked at the report on the counter. He looked at the name at the top of the flagged section. "Serious enough that I'm calling you from my kitchen," he said. He ended the call. He stood in the quiet apartment for another moment. Then he went to the piano. He played the piece Elise had assigned him, from the beginning, all the way through, slower than he needed to now, but deliberate about it, pressing each note down with full intention, the way she had told him to in the 3rd lesson, because the piano would tell her things, and a note played halfway was a note that didn't trust itself. He played it until both hands were doing the same thing, until they knew they were in the same piece. The council met on a Wednesday. Rowan had chosen the location himself, a warehouse on the east side of the port district that the organization used for legitimate freight storage, and that Garrett Finch had no administrative connection to, a detail Rowan had verified 3 separate times before he sent the summons. The building smelled like salt water and machine oil, and the particular cold of a space that is heated just enough to be functional and no more. Folding tables had been arranged in a rectangle. Fluorescent lights hung overhead. There were no windows at this level. There was nothing decorative about any of it. 9 men came. Cosimo Reyes sat to Rowan's left. The others arranged themselves with the careful, instinctive geometry of people who understand that where you sit in a room like this communicates something you may later be held to. Garrett Finch sat directly across from Rowan. He had come without hesitation when Cosimo delivered the summons. He had arrived on time, dressed as he always dressed, carrying the folio as he always carried it. He had looked at the room, the warehouse, the folding tables, the 9 faces, and registered nothing visible. He was, Rowan thought, watching him take his seat, the most composed man in a room full of men who had built their lives around the performance of composure. That told him something. Rowan did not open with the financial records. He did not open with the media consultancy or the shell accounts or the 9-year timeline his investigator had spent 72 hours assembling. He opened with a single question, delivered in the same tone he used for everything, because changing his tone for this particular conversation would have given Garrett information he did not yet need to have. "Tell me about the Meridian account," Rowan said. Something moved across Garrett's face. Not much. A micro-adjustment, the kind that would have been invisible to anyone not specifically watching for it. His hands, folded on the table in front of him, did not move. "The Meridian account," Garrett said, "is an infrastructure subsidiary under the Eastern Development portfolio. It's in the quarterly. The Meridian account," Rowan said, "has processed 47 transfers in the past 9 years to 3 shell entities that do not appear in any Callaway filing I have been given access to. The total transferred is approximately $31 million. He paused. "Tell me about the shell entities." The room was absolutely still. Garrett looked at Rowan across the folding table. He held the look for 3 full seconds, long enough to communicate that he was not going to pretend he hadn't heard, long enough to make a decision about how to proceed. And then he exhaled through his nose, a single quiet breath, and Rowan watched the 19-year performance of measured neutrality shift into something else. Something that had been underneath it the whole time, patient and cold and entirely comfortable with itself. "How much do you have?" Garrett said. "More than enough." "Specifically?" "Garrett," Cosimo's voice, from Rowan's left. Quiet, final. Garrett looked at Cosimo. He looked back at Rowan. He unfolded his hands and placed them flat on the table. "The shell entities are structured as private consulting firms," he said. 2 are registered in Delaware. 1 is registered in the Cayman Islands through a law firm that has no visible connection to anything in this room. His voice was completely even. "The transfers represent a management fee structure for services rendered to the Callaway organization's political relationships. Services that are not formally documented because their nature does not lend itself to formal documentation." "Services," Rowan repeated. "Specifically, the maintenance of relationships with 4 city council members, 2 state senators, and a federal regulator whose jurisdiction covers the Seaport Development Zone. The payments fund access. They have been funding access for 9 years. The organization has benefited from that access in ways that are reflected in every significant permit, license, and zoning variance that the Seaport Development has obtained in that period." The room absorbed this. Cosimo said, "You ran an undisclosed slush fund through the organization's accounts for 9 years and categorized it as infrastructure." "I ran a functional political maintenance system," Garrett said, "through accounts that provided adequate structural distance from the organization's core holdings. Yes." "Without Rowan's authorization," Garrett looked at Rowan. "Without formal authorization," he said. "With the implicit understanding over 9 years that the political relationships I was maintaining were producing results that Rowan valued and did not scrutinize." The temperature in the room had not changed. It felt colder. Rowan said, "The Denholm engagement." Garrett did not answer immediately. "The Denholm engagement," Rowan said again, and this time there was something in it that was not a question. "The Denholm Financial Network," Garrett said carefully, "overlaps with 2 of the 3 shell entities. Marcus Denholm's personal attorney is a partner at the firm that manages the Cayman registration." He paused. The engagement was a structural alignment. It would have formalized a relationship that already existed at the financial level in a way that made the existing relationship, discoverable, considerably more defensible. The silence lasted 4 seconds. "You arranged my engagement," Rowan said, "to protect your own financial exposure. I arranged an alignment that protected the organization's political infrastructure." Garrett's voice did not waver. "Which is the same thing I have done for 19 years. The mechanism was more personal than previous arrangements. The principle was identical." Cosimo put both hands on the table and stood up. Garrett did not look at him. He kept his eyes on Rowan. "You want to know the rest?" Garrett said. "I can see that you do." So I'll tell you the rest because at this point the accounting is more useful to you than the concealment is to me. He reached into the folio. He produced a document, thick, tabbed, the organized output of someone who has been maintaining records for a very long time. He slid it across the table to Rowan. Everything, every account, every transfer, every contact, every political relationship, every media engagement. 19 years. I kept records because I'm not careless, and because I always understood that there would eventually be a conversation like this one, and that when it happened, I would need to demonstrate that the organization's interests were served at every step. He folded his hands again. They were. Rowan looked at the document. He did not touch it. The media campaign against Elise Calder, he said. A protective measure. Explain that. You were changing. Garrett said it without inflection, without apology, without any of the lubricating language that people use when they are about to say something they know will land badly. In a direction that was incompatible with the structural arrangements I had built. The woman was the catalyst. Removing her influence was the most direct intervention available. You went after a piano teacher. I managed a variable that was destabilizing a 19-year architecture. Rowan picked up the document. He looked at the first page. He set it back down. We're done, he said. Garrett nodded, once, as though this were the conclusion of a business meeting. He began to stand. Sit down, Cosmo said. Garrett sat down. What happened in the next 40 minutes was not a discussion. Rowan presented the investigator's report. Cosmo's people produced corroborating records from 3 separate access points. 2 of the other men at the table produced documentation of their own. Smaller irregularities, patterns they had noticed and not yet acted on, things that now fit into a larger shape with the particular terrible clarity of puzzle pieces that have been lying face down. Garrett answered questions. He answered them with the same measured precision he had brought to every conversation for 19 years. And Rowan sat across from him and thought about how completely he had trusted that precision, how thoroughly he had interpreted Garrett's consistency as loyalty rather than what it actually was, which was management. At the end of the 40 minutes, Rowan looked at the man he had worked with since he was 22 years old and said, "You built it inside my house." "Yes," Garrett said, "for 11 years. The foundational structure took roughly 3 years. The operational layer took 8 more. And if last night at the Aldrich Grand had gone the way you planned it..." Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The Denholm marriage would have formalized the financial overlap. Within 18 months, given the seaport development timeline, the organization's core accounts and the shell structure would have been sufficiently integrated that separation would have required a forensic audit of everything, including accounts you currently hold." He paused. At which point the leverage differential would have shifted. Rowan looked at him. "You were going to own me," Rowan said. Garrett did not agree. He did not disagree. He looked at Rowan with the face of a man who has decided that the most dignified position available to him at this particular moment is accuracy, and said, "I was going to make you dependent on a structure you didn't control. That's not ownership, that's architecture." Cosimo said something in Spanish under his breath. The council session ended. Garrett was escorted from the building by 2 men who had been standing near the door since the meeting began. He went without resistance, carrying the folio, walking with the same unhurried precision he had always walked with, and Rowan watched him go and felt something he did not immediately have a name for. Not betrayal exactly, because betrayal implied surprise, and what he felt was the retrospective recognition of something that had been true for a very long time without his knowledge, which was a different kind of damage, and in some ways a worse one. Cosimo sat back down. The other men waited. "The shell accounts," Cosimo said. "What do we do with the political relationships that run through them?" "We document everything," Rowan said. "Every contact, every payment, every official. We determine which relationships can be maintained at arm's length and which ones are toxic. Anything toxic gets cut." He looked at the document Garrett had produced. "The Denholm stake in the seaport development. I want the legal team on it by tomorrow morning. If Marcus Denholm's attorney is the Cayman registrant, the entire partnership has to be renegotiated from scratch. Marcus doesn't have a position to negotiate from until we determine how much of his own exposure is tied to Garrett's structure." Rowan stood up. "Get me the legal team tonight, and I want someone physically present at every account that runs through the Eastern Development portfolio until we've completed the separation audit. Nothing moves without 2 signatures and my authorization. The men dispersed. Cosimo stayed. When the room was empty, he said, without looking at Rowan, "You didn't know." "No." "How long do you think it was going to go before you did?" Rowan thought about this honestly. "If the engagement had happened," he said, "probably never." Cosimo nodded slowly. He picked up his coat from the back of his chair. "The piano teacher," he said. "Don't." "I'm not editorializing, I'm asking whether she's safe." Rowan had not thought about this in those terms. He thought about it now, and the answer assembled itself with a speed that was uncomfortable. "I don't know what else Garrett put in motion before Wednesday," he said. Cosimo put on his coat. "Then you should find out." He left. Rowan stood alone in the warehouse with the fluorescent lights and the cold and the document Garrett had produced sitting in the center of the folding table. He picked it up. He put it under his arm. He called his investigator from the parking lot. Garrett had at least 60 days of operation after he identified Elise Calder as a variable, Rowan said. "I need to know everything he touched in those 60 days. Media contacts, financial movements, any communications with anyone connected to the Clement Street property." He paused. "And I need to know if there's anything pointed directly at her that we haven't found yet." He drove toward Clement Street. He did not call ahead. The music center was closed when he arrived. It was 9:40 in the evening, and the last class had ended at 7:30. The lights in the front window were off, but a light was on in the back office, visible through the alley-facing window, and when he knocked on the glass door at the front, Petra appeared from somewhere in the back and looked at him through the door with an expression that managed to communicate both recognition and a complete lack of enthusiasm. She let him in. "She's in the office," Petra said. "Don't stay long. She's been here since 8 this morning." He found Elise at the desk in the back office, which was a small room containing approximately twice as much furniture as it was designed to hold. A desk, 2 filing cabinets, a bookshelf with the organized density of someone who cannot bring themselves to throw away useful information, and a second-hand office chair whose armrest had been repaired with electrical tape. She had a spreadsheet open on the laptop and a paper ledger open beside it, and she was cross-referencing the two with the focused concentration of someone engaged in a task that requires complete attention and does not welcome interruption. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway. She read his face. "Sit down," she said. She closed the laptop partway. She did not close it entirely, which he took to mean she intended to return to it shortly, and this conversation had a finite duration she was already managing. He sat in the chair she kept for parents. He told her what he had found. Not all of it. Not the full scope of the financial architecture. Not the details of the council meeting. Not the specific mechanics of what Garrett had been building. But he told her about the media consultancy. He told her that the campaign against her had been deliberately constructed, that it had come from inside his organization, and that the person responsible was no longer in any position to continue it. She listened without interrupting him. She had a particular quality of listening. He had noticed it in the lessons, the way she gave complete attention without performing engagement, without the small affirmations and nodding that people used to signal they were following. She simply absorbed what was being said and held it. When he finished, she looked at the closed laptop for a moment. "The 3 families," she said. "I know. I don't know if they come back, Rowan. Even if the stories stop." She said it without anger, which was worse than anger would have been. "That's not something you can fix." "I know that too." She looked at him. "Did you know it was going to cost something like this when you walked in here 3 weeks ago?" He thought about telling her no. He considered the architecture of that answer, how it was partially true, how it was defensible, how it would be the easier thing to say in this room at this hour. "I knew it would cost something," he said. "I didn't know it would cost you." She looked at him for a long time. "Go home," she said finally. "It's late, and I need to finish the reconciliation." "Elise? Thursday at 2, she said. She opened the laptop. "Don't be late." He drove home through the near-empty streets. He sat in the car outside his building for 6 minutes. He thought about Garrett's face across the folding table. He thought about the document under his arm. He thought about the Aldrich Grand and the particular expression on Elise's face in the photograph. The complete absence of calculation in it. The quality that had stopped him in the middle of a room full of 300 people and refused to leave. He thought about the fact that Garrett had identified that quality before he did, had recognized it as a threat before Rowan understood it as anything at all, and had moved against it with the efficiency of someone removing a structural obstruction. He thought about what that said about what he had been, for 19 years, before a piano teacher in a cream sweater with an ink stain on the cuff told him his hands didn't trust each other. He went inside. He did not sleep. In the morning, his investigator called at 7:43. "I found the rest," the investigator said. He had a voice that had spent 20 years delivering unwelcome information and had developed a particular flatness for doing so. "You need to sit down. Tell me." "The Clement Street property, the Music Center's building. The lease runs through a commercial holding company, Strand Meridian Properties. Elise Calder has been a tenant there for 9 years. The holding company changed hands 4 years ago." A pause. "The current beneficial owner, through 2 layers of shell registration, is Garrett Finch." Rowan stood in his kitchen with the phone against his ear and did not say anything. "He owns her building," the investigator said. "He has owned it for 4 years. The lease terms have a 60-day termination clause with a relocation penalty that the center cannot pay. If he activates it, she loses the building. Within 60 days, yes." Rowan set the phone on the counter. He stood there for a moment with his hand flat on the marble and the particular quality of silence that follows information that reorganizes everything around it. "Has he activated it?" he said. "Not yet, but there's a letter, drafted, not sent. I found it in a document cache associated with one of the shell firm's email servers. It's dated last Monday." Last Monday. 3 days before the council meeting. 3 days before Garrett walked into a warehouse and produced a document and answered questions with the measured precision of a man who understood exactly what he was giving up and was calculating, even then, what he still had left to use. The letter had been drafted before the council meeting, which meant Garrett had known the council meeting was coming, or had anticipated it, and had prepared a final mechanism, something he could activate remotely, something that did not require his physical presence or his authority within the organization. Something that would hurt the one person Rowan could not address through any of the channels he controlled. "How difficult is the ownership structure to break?" Rowan said. "If Garrett activates the termination and you want to challenge it legally, you're looking at 6 to 8 months of litigation minimum. The shell structure is clean. His attorneys built it well." The investigator paused. "There's a faster route. If you can get the Strand Meridian Holding Company to voluntarily assign the lease to a third party before the termination is activated, you close the window. But you'd need either Garrett's cooperation or the cooperation of whoever else has signatory authority on the holding company." "Who else has signatory authority?" Another pause, longer this time. "Marcus Denholm," the investigator said. "Marcus Denholm is a co-signatory on the Strand Meridian operating agreement." Rowan picked up the phone again. He thought about Garrett's face at the warehouse, the absolute composure of it, the way he had produced the document and slid it across the table and answered every question, because he had known, in that room, with that document in front of them, that what he was handing over was the visible architecture, the part he had already decided he could afford to lose. He had kept the building. He had kept Elise's building. He had kept the one lever that operated outside the organization entirely, that could not be dismantled by a council vote or a financial audit or any action Rowan could take within the structure of his own world. Rowan said, "I need Marcus Denholm's personal attorney's direct contact, the one at the Cayman firm. Get it to me in an hour." "I can get you a number. Whether they take the call is, get me the number." He ended the call. He stood in the kitchen. He thought about Elise in the back office at 9:40 in the evening, cross-referencing a spreadsheet and a paper ledger, rebuilding the center's budget against the cost of 3 families who might not come back, in a building that a man she had never met had owned for 4 years and had been waiting to use as a weapon. He thought about the fact that she had built 11 years inside those walls. He thought about the 9-year-old girl and the gold stars. He picked up the phone and called a number he had not called in 8 years, a number that belonged to a man named Vincent Rao, who had been his attorney before he restructured his legal representation, and who operated with a specific and documented expertise in commercial property disputes involving obfuscated ownership structures. Vincent answered on the second ring. "Rowan," he said, with the tone of someone who has been waiting, in an abstract way, for this call for approximately 8 years. "What have you gotten yourself into?" "I'll explain when you get here. Bring whoever you need for commercial property litigation. I need a strategy in 3 hours." A pause. "How complex is the ownership chain?" 2 shells, a Cayman registration, and a co-signatory who currently has significant incentive to be cooperative and a very short window in which his cooperation is still worth something to him. "I'll make calls," Vincent said. "Give me 2 hours." He ended the call. He sat down at the kitchen table with Garrett's document in front of him and opened it to the section covering the Seaport Development Partnerships. He read for 40 minutes. He made notes in the margin. His handwriting in the margins was different from his normal handwriting, smaller, more compressed, the handwriting of a man working faster than he usually works. His phone buzzed. A message from his investigator. A phone number. A name. Harlan Stitch, senior partner, Whitmore & Stitch, Grand Cayman, and a single additional note. Stitch has been Denholm's attorney for 22 years. He knows everything. He may know more than Marcus does. Rowan looked at the name for a moment, then he dialed. The call connected after 4 rings. A voice. Older, careful. The voice of a man who takes calls from numbers he doesn't recognize because the alternative is not knowing who is calling. "Mr. Stitch," Rowan said. "My name is Rowan Calloway. I believe you manage certain structural arrangements that we have a mutual interest in discussing before the end of business today." A silence. The particular quality of a silence from someone who is very good at maintaining silence. "Mr. Calloway," Stitch said finally, "I'm going to need to call you back on a different line." "I'll wait," Rowan said. The call dropped. He sat and waited. He looked at the window. Outside, the city was fully awake now, mid-morning, ordinary in all the ways it was always ordinary. Traffic and delivery trucks, and people with coffee cups walking in directions that mattered to them and no one else. His phone rang. A different number. He answered. "The Strand Meridian property on Clement Street," Rowan said, before Stitch could speak. "I want the beneficial ownership assigned to a third party of my choosing before 5 o'clock today. In exchange, I will ensure that Marcus Denholm's exposure within the Calloway organization's financial documentation, including his signatory role in the operating agreement, remains a matter of private record rather than an exhibit in any subsequent legal proceeding." Stitch said, "That's not the kind of offer I can process without speaking to my client." "Then speak to your client. You have until noon." He ended the call. He went to the piano. He played the piece Elise had assigned him, not because it was the appropriate response to the morning he had just had, but because it was the only thing available to him in that moment that required full attention without requiring a decision. His hands moved through the measures. He made 2 mistakes he had stopped making 2 weeks ago, which told him something about the state of his concentration. He played it again. The mistakes were still there. He played it a 3rd time. The mistakes were gone. His phone rang at 11:47, Harlan Stitch. "Mr. Calloway," Stitch said, "my client is prepared to discuss a voluntary assignment of the Strand Meridian operating interest. He has questions about the scope of the undertaking you referenced. Tell your client that the scope is limited to the Calloway organization's internal documentation. What Marcus Denholm does with his own financial arrangements going forward is entirely his concern. I'm not in the business of controlling what I don't own." He paused. "Tell him also that Garrett Finch is no longer in a position to protect anyone's exposure, including his own, which means the value of Marcus's cooperation has a very short shelf life." A pause. "I'll convey that," Stitch said. "You have until 2 o'clock. He ended the call. He looked at his hands. At 1:51, Stitch called back. "My client agrees in principle," Stitch said. "He wants the assignment to a blind trust rather than a named entity." "Acceptable," Rowan said. "I'll have my attorney contact you within the hour with the trust documentation." He called Vincent. Vincent said, "I've got the papers. Send me Stitch's contact and I'll have the assignment executed by 4. 3:30, Rowan said. "Rowan." 3:30, Vincent. At 3:47, Vincent called back. "It's done," he said. "The Strand Meridian operating interest is assigned to the Calder Community Trust, beneficial owner unnamed in the public record. The trust is structured so that the music center's lease converts to a nominal rate for the next 25 years. Termination requires a supermajority of the trust board, which currently consists of 3 people I have suggested and you have approved, and none of whom have any existing relationship with Garrett Finch or Marcus Denholm." Rowan sat in his kitchen. "Who is the named beneficiary of the trust?" he said. "The Calder Music Center," Vincent said. "The building is effectively hers, she just doesn't know it yet." Rowan sat with that for a moment. "Don't tell her where it came from," he said. Rowan, when she finds out, she will find out, he said. Eventually, on her own terms. He looked out the window. Not for me. Not today. Vincent was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in the particular tone of a man who has known someone for a long time and is choosing not to say everything he is thinking. Okay. Rowan ended the call. He sat in the kitchen for a long time. He thought about Garrett somewhere in the city, stripped of his authority, his financial structure being dismantled account by account, his 19 years of careful architecture being taken apart with the methodical efficiency of people who now understood exactly what they were looking at. He thought about the letter that had been drafted but not sent, sitting in a document cache on a server that no longer connected to any lever Garrett could reach. He thought about how close it had been. I thought about what would have happened to the music center, to the 9-year-old and the veteran named Marcus and Dorothy, with her sonata, to Elise standing in the back office at 9:40 at night, cross-referencing numbers in a building that a man she'd never met had been positioning as a weapon for 4 years. He thought about Garrett's voice saying, I was going to make you dependent on a structure you didn't control. And he thought, with the particular grinding clarity that comes when a man finally stops managing the distance between who he is and who he has been, that what Garrett had said was entirely accurate, and that the structure Garrett had spent 19 years building inside his house was not the only structure that had made him dependent on something he didn't fully control. The difference was that the other structure, the one that had made Garrett's 19 years possible, was one he had built himself. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. The voice on the other end was one he did not recognize. Young, careful, with the quality of someone reading from a prepared script that they have been told to deliver without deviation. Mr. Calloway, the voice said, I'm calling on behalf of certain individuals who were introduced to Mr. Finch's operational network through the political relationship program. These individuals are concerned about the implications of the current organizational restructuring for their— Stop, Rowan said. The voice stopped. Tell whoever sent you that I have complete documentation of every payment made through Garrett Finch's network for 9 years. Tell them that documentation is currently in the hands of 3 separate attorneys with instructions that its distribution is contingent on the continued safety and operation of certain community institutions in this city. He paused. Tell them to go home. He ended the call. He stood up from the kitchen table. He put on his coat. He picked up his keys. He looked at the piano for a moment, the old instrument he had owned for 12 years and played approximately 4 times, that now had a groove worn into the bench from the past month of evenings. He locked the apartment and took the elevator down and got in the car. He drove to Clement Street. It was 4:20 in the afternoon. Through the painted window of the music center, he could see Elise in room 3, sitting beside a student, a teenager he hadn't seen before, hunched over the keys with the specific tense concentration of someone who is trying very hard and knows it. Elise was saying something. The teenager played a phrase. Elise said something else. The teenager played it again, and this time something in the posture changed, and even from outside on the sidewalk, Rowan could see the small shift in the teenager's shoulders that meant the note had come out right. He stood on the sidewalk and watched through the painted glass. He did not go in. He stood there until the lesson ended, until the teenager came out with sheet music under one arm and a practice chart in their hand, until Elise appeared in the doorway to say something to Petra at the front desk, until she turned and looked through the window and saw him standing on the sidewalk. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she opened the door. Thursday is tomorrow, she said. I know. You could come in now if you want to work on measure 3. He looked at her. He thought about everything he had done since 7:43 that morning. He thought about what he had not yet told her, and what he would eventually have to tell her, and the particular distance between those 2 things that he would have to cross. Yes, he said. He went inside. She sat him at the piano and opened the notebook and told him to start from the beginning, which he did, slowly, with the full attention of both hands, pressing each note down with intention, the way she had taught him, because a note played halfway was a note that didn't trust itself, and he was done. He had decided in the kitchen at 7:43 in the morning, with everything in his life that did not trust itself, beginning with the man who had looked out a penthouse window and thought he had built something solid. He played through to the end of the piece. Elise made a note in the notebook. Better, she said. And outside, in a car parked on Clement Street that neither of them had noticed, a man with a phone and a long-lens camera sent a single message to a number with no name attached to it, and the message read, "He's inside. Daily now. Confirmed." 3 seconds later, the reply came back. "Good. Let him get comfortable." He set up 40 chairs. He did it without asking where they went because Elise had said the main room and the main room had an obvious configuration, rows facing the low platform at the far end. Enough space between them for people who sometimes needed space, close enough together for people who sometimes needed proximity. He figured it out from the arrangement of the room itself, from the scuff marks on the floor that told him where the chairs had been placed before, from the way the afternoon light came through the side windows and made the front rows warmer than the back. He set up 40 chairs in 22 minutes. Then he sat in one of them, in the third row, and read his attorney's preliminary assessment of the federal communications Margot had sent. Vincent had flagged 11 specific exchanges between the Seaport Development Team's legal contact and the regulatory official, 18 months of correspondence, exactly as Margot had described, exactly as real as his attorney's careful language was telling him they were. The exchanges documented a relationship that occupied the specific gray territory between access and impropriety, the kind of terrain that federal oversight boards found extremely interesting regardless of which side of the line the actual conduct fell on. Vincent's assessment ran 4 pages. The final paragraph said, "Worst case, permits voided, clawback proceedings from 3 lenders, timeline collapse on the Eastern Development Zone. Best case, 18 months of litigation, significant legal cost, outcome uncertain. The materials are genuine. There is no version of this that isn't expensive." Rowan read it twice. He folded his phone. He sat in the third row of the main room and listened to the building around him. Petra on the phone at the front desk, Elise moving through the center, doing whatever she was doing. The ordinary sounds of a place that had been running on competence and commitment for 11 years, while people outside it made decisions about its future without knowing what was inside. At 1:45, the first veterans arrived. They came in the way people come into a space they have been coming into long enough to feel easy, and not quite the way they'd enter their own homes, but not the way they'd enter a formal appointment either. Something between. A man in his late 40s named Darnell, who always sat in the same chair and always positioned his sheet music at the same slight angle. A woman named Ingrid, who was 61 and had started the program 8 months ago and had improved to a degree that still surprised Elise, though she kept that surprise to herself because Ingrid didn't need surprise. She needed expectation. A young man barely past 25, new to the group, who had come 3 times and still sat with his back to the wall and his eyes on the door. Rowan moved to the back of the room without being asked. Elise came in at 1:58. She had changed, a dark green cardigan over a different shirt, her hair down again, the ink-stained cuff gone. She carried the notebook. She looked at the room, the chairs, the people in them, the young man with his back to the wall, and then she looked briefly at Rowan in the back corner and said nothing, which was the right thing. The session ran 90 minutes. Rowan had attended board meetings that lasted longer and cost more and accomplished less. He watched from the back with the particular quality of attention he had developed in room 3, the one that had started as observation and become, over the past several weeks, something more like listening. He watched Darnell work through a progression that had been giving him trouble for 6 sessions, and finally, in the 42nd minute of this one, get it right. He watched Ingrid play a full page without stopping, something she had announced at the start of the session she intended to do and then did. And the look on her face afterward was not pride exactly. It was quieter than pride. It was the look of someone who has done something they genuinely were not sure they could do. He watched the young man with his back to the wall spend most of the session not playing, and then, in the last 10 minutes, pick up the borrowed guitar that Elise had placed on the chair beside him 2 sessions ago without comment, and hold it. He did not play it, but he held it. Elise saw it. She continued the session without acknowledging it. Later, after the others had left, she left the guitar on the chair. At 3:37, after the last veteran had gone, and Petra had brought in 2 cups of coffee from the kitchen and then tactfully withdrawn, Elise sat down in the chair across from the one Rowan had pulled to the corner of the main room, and she looked at him with the expression of a woman who has been thinking about something for several hours and has arrived at the end of her thinking. "What I wanted to say," she said. She wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. Her hands were a musician's hands, short-nailed, strong, with the particular calluses that come from years of contact with keys. She looked at them for a moment. I've been running this place for 11 years. I built it from a single room with 11 students and a used upright that was 2 semitones flat on the high register. She looked up. I've had difficult years. Grant funding that fell through. A flood that cost me 6 weeks and $4,000 I didn't have. A period about 5 years ago when enrollment dropped enough that I seriously considered closing. What kept you open? He said. I didn't close because closing felt like a decision I was making from fear, she said. And I had a rule early on that I wasn't going to make decisions from fear, because if I started, I wouldn't stop. She looked at the guitar still on the chair across the room. I don't know if that's wisdom or stubbornness. Probably both. Probably the same thing, most of the time. He waited. What I want to see you, she said, is not about the permits, or Margot Denholm, or any of it. She turned the coffee cup in her hands. It's about the fact that you've been coming here for 6 weeks, and playing badly, and practicing at night, and filling in every star on the practice chart, and sitting in the back of a veterans group you didn't have to sit in, and I've been watching all of it. She paused. And I need to know if that's you. He looked at her. What else would it be? He said. No, she said. 6 weeks ago, I didn't know you existed. 6 weeks before that, someone removed a musician from a gig and put me in a room at the Aldrich Grand because they had read a profile of you and decided I was the right variable to introduce. She met his eyes. I've had a long time to think about that. What it means that this started as someone else's plan. It means their plan worked better than they expected, he said, because what they didn't plan for was what happened next. What happened next? She said. You handed the ring back, he said. That wasn't their plan. Their plan was the incident, the photograph, the incident, the introduction, the moment after it was yours. He held her gaze. And what you did with it was nothing I would have predicted and nothing they modeled, because what you did was go to the piano and play Chopin as though nothing happened. Not because you were performing composure, because the music was what you were there to do, and you did it. She was quiet for a moment. I was embarrassed, she said. I wanted to be somewhere else. I know, he said. That's what made it real. She looked at the guitar. She looked back at him. The building, she said. He had been waiting for this. Vincent told me this morning, she said, with the particular calm of someone who has already processed their initial reaction and is now operating from the other side of it. He called to tell me the lease terms had changed and thought I should understand why. She paused. He thought you would have told me yourself. I was going to tell you myself. When? When the timing was yours instead of mine. He kept his eyes on her. I didn't want you to feel like it was a transaction, or an apology, she said. Yes. She looked at him for a long, quiet moment. It was an apology, she said. Yes, he said, for something that wasn't entirely your fault. For something that happened in my world, he said, using my name. That's enough. She turned the coffee cup again. She set it down on the floor beside her chair. I'm not going to pretend I don't know what the building means, she said. 11 years in a building is a different thing from 11 years in a lease. And I know what it costs to get it done in a single day, and I know what it means that you did it without telling me. She paused. I'm also not going to pretend I'm not angry about the way it was done. You have every right to be, he said. I'm working on it, she said. I'll get there. She looked at him. What I will not do is let the way it was done change what it actually is, which is, you found out that someone was using a building I've been in for 11 years as a weapon against me, and you spent an entire day making it impossible for that weapon to exist. She was quiet for a moment. That's not nothing. No, he said. It's also not sufficient, she said. He waited. What's sufficient, she said carefully, is that you keep being the person who set up 40 chairs this morning and sat in the back of a session he didn't have to attend and is sitting in this room right now telling me the truth. When you could have told me several more comfortable versions of it. She picked up the coffee cup again. I'm not asking you to be someone different than you are. I'm asking you to keep being who you've been in this building, which is different from who you were when you walked in. He sat with that. The permits, he said. Tell me, she said. Vincent thinks we can fight it, not guarantee it, fight it. There's a defensible argument that the regulatory correspondence, even with its problems, falls inside the legal definition of permitted contact, given the development's public benefit classification. If we can establish that the communications were standard industry practice for this type of project, the Oversight Board may not recommend enforcement. He paused. He paused. It's a long fight. 18 months minimum. Expensive. Uncertain. But possible, she said. Possible, he said. What does losing look like? The Eastern Development Zone loses its permits. 3 lenders initiate clawback proceedings. The organization takes a significant hit, not fatal, but restructuring level. Some of what we've built in the past 8 years has to be rebuilt. He held her gaze. I've been in worse positions. Have you? She said, not skeptically, genuinely. Once, he said, before I had anything, the first few years. He looked at the room. It's harder now because there's more to lose. But that's the only difference. She nodded slowly. And Margot, she said. Margot has a choice, he said. Release the communications and trigger a federal review that also exposes her family's connection to Garrett's relay infrastructure, which is documented and which Vincent now holds, or keep them and accept the terms I offered her this morning. He paused. I gave her until 5 o'clock to decide. Elise looked at her watch. It was 4:12. 48 minutes, she said. Yes. She picked up her coffee. She drank some of it. She looked at the guitar on the chair across the room for a moment. Whatever she decides, Elise said, you should know that this place is going to be running on Thursday 2 weeks from now, and the Thursday after that, and every Thursday for as long as I'm standing. She set the cup down. Not because I'm fearless, because I made a decision early on about what I wouldn't let change what happens in here, and I'm not revising it because the past 6 weeks were difficult. I know, he said. Good, she said. She stood up. She picked up the notebook from the chair beside her. She looked at him with the complete, unhurried directness that had been the same in every room and in every light since the night of the Aldrich Grand. Come back on Tuesday. We're going to start on something new. What piece? He said. She considered this for a moment with the specific, contained thoughtfulness of someone who takes the question seriously. Something with both hands doing the same thing, she said. Eventually, she walked back through the center toward the back office. He sat in the 3rd row of the main room for a few minutes after she had gone, in the afternoon light, in the chair that still held some warmth from the veteran who had sat in it during the session. He looked at the guitar on the chair across the room. He looked at the scuff marks on the floor that told him where the chairs had always gone. At 4:51, his phone rang. Vincent. He answered. Margot called, Vincent said. She's not releasing the communications. Rowan let out a slow breath through his nose. She's accepting the terms, he said. She's accepting a modified version, Vincent said. She wants the Callaway organization to voluntarily disclose the regulatory correspondence through its own legal counsel, preemptively, before any outside party can use it, and to document the disclosure as a compliance initiative rather than an enforcement response. She'll hold the original copies and not release them to any outside party as long as the disclosure proceeds on the agreed timeline. Why does she want the voluntary disclosure? Rowan said. Because if it comes out through her as a weapon, the Denholm family's connection to Garrett's relay infrastructure comes out with it, Vincent said. If it comes out through you as a compliance initiative, her family's exposure stays private, and you take the regulatory scrutiny on your own terms. A pause. It's not a good deal for you, but it's a survivable one, and I think she knows that pushing harder right now puts her in a position she can't recover from. She's cutting her losses, Rowan said. She's a smart woman who has run the calculation and determined that a survivable position is better than a mutually destructive one. Vincent paused. I'd call it the right decision on her part, honestly. She's young. She has time to rebuild. Rowan thought about Margot Denholm in the Aldrich Grand, the ivory silk, the expression that moved beyond anger into somewhere geological, the 4 days in a Palm Beach hotel suite building an operation she had believed was airtight. He thought about how well she had read him, the profile, the gap, the variable introduced with precision into exactly the right room. He thought about the fact that she had been right about everything except what happened after. Tell her I agree to the terms, he said. Get the disclosure timeline drafted tonight. I want it signed by both parties before end of business tomorrow. I'll have it to her attorney by 9 in the morning, Vincent said. And Vincent, Rowan said, the Denholm Financial Network's exposure through Garrett's relay. I want it sealed. Not used, not disclosed, not held as leverage. Documented and sealed. If Marcus Denholm or Margot Denholm operates in good faith from here, it stays sealed permanently. A pause. That's a significant concession, Vincent said. It's a clean ending, Rowan said. I'm done carrying other people's exposure as leverage. We document everything, we disclose what's ours to disclose, and we let the rest go. Rowan, Vincent said, in the tone of a man choosing his words carefully, the organization's regulatory exposure, even through voluntary disclosure, is going to generate scrutiny for the better part of the next 2 years. That means personal scrutiny, everything connected to your name. I know, Rowan said. The music center, Vincent said. The trust, your personal activities in that vicinity, all of it is going to be visible. I know, Rowan said. A pause. Okay, Vincent said. He had the tone again, the one from the Strand Meridian conversation, the man who had known Rowan for 8 years and was choosing not to say everything he was thinking. I'll have the paperwork ready. Rowan ended the call. He sat in the main room for another moment. Then he stood up. He looked at the guitar. He walked over to it, picked it up from the chair with the careful grip of someone who doesn't play guitar and knows it, and carried it back to the storage room at the end of the hall where the instrument cases were kept. And he set it inside a case that was already there, and he closed the case without latching it. The way Elise left things, he had noticed, the way she kept the door open even when she wasn't in the room. He went to the back office. Elise was at the desk. The laptop was open. The ledger was closed, which was different from this morning, which meant she had finished the reconciliation, which meant that the thing she had been working on since 7 o'clock the previous evening was done. He stood in the doorway. 5 o'clock passed, she said without looking up. Margot accepted modified terms, he said. The organization discloses the regulatory correspondence voluntarily. The Denholm family's exposure stays sealed. Everyone walks away with something they can live with. She looked up. The permits? She said. Still uncertain, but the disclosure is on our terms, which gives us the strongest possible position in the review. He paused. It's the best available outcome. Not a good outcome. The best one. She looked at him. That's enough, she said. Sometimes, he said. She turned back to the laptop. She looked at the screen for a moment, then she closed it. She looked at the corkboard, the practice charts, the gold stars, the schedule for next week already written in the particular ink she used. Thursday at 2 o'clock marked with the same hand as every Thursday before it. The young man today, she said, the one in the back. He picked up the guitar, Rowan said. He's been coming for 3 weeks, and he hasn't touched it. She turned the closed laptop slightly on the desk, a small, unconscious adjustment. The week before he came in for the first time, he couldn't be in a room with more than 3 people without, she paused, choosing the word, without leaving. Whatever he's dealing with, large rooms are difficult, groups are difficult. She looked at the door. He came back 3 weeks in a row, and today he picked it up. He didn't play it, Rowan said. He didn't need to, she said. Not today. She stood up. She straightened the ledger on the desk. She looked at him. That's the whole job. Getting someone close enough to a thing that they can consider it. The rest is theirs. He thought about room 3. The first lesson, the hand position, the correction delivered without softening, the practice chart with the gold stars, the particular quality of the room, the old paper smell, the lemon polish, the window onto the alley that he had described to no one and thought about more than he expected. I want to tell you something, he said. She waited. When I walked in here 6 weeks ago, he said, I told you I didn't know yet why I was here. That was true. It took me about 2.5 weeks to know. He looked at the corkboard. The third Thursday. You had me play the same measure 6 times, and each time I played it, you told me what was wrong with it. And each time I corrected the thing you told me was wrong, there was still something else wrong, and by the 6th time I was genuinely irritated. He paused, and I realized, somewhere in the 6th repetition, that I wasn't irritated at you. I was irritated at the measure, which meant I was engaged with the measure, which meant I was actually learning something for the first time in a very long time, and the irritation was the friction of that. He looked at her. I came back the next Tuesday because I wanted to know what the measure sounded like when I got it right. She looked at him for a moment. Did you get it right? She said. The following Thursday, he said. You wrote something in the notebook. I write things in the notebook after every session, she said. You looked at it twice, he said. You only look at it twice when something is different. She was quiet for a moment. She was, he had come to understand, a woman who processed most things fully before she spoke about them. And the silence before she spoke was not absence, but the opposite of it, full, working, arriving at something. He had learned to wait for it, which was not something he had been good at 6 weeks ago and was becoming better at. The thing I want to say, she said, is that I've had students who practiced harder, and students who progressed faster, and students who were more naturally suited to the instrument. She looked at him directly. What I haven't had, in 11 years, is a student who came back every single time they were supposed to, not one missed session, not one late arrival after the first. She paused. That's rarer than talent, and it matters more. He held her gaze. Tuesday at 2, he said. Tuesday at 2, she said. She picked up her bag from the hook on the door. She looked at the office. The spreadsheet closed, the ledger straight, the 3 empty coffee cups from the overnight she was leaving until morning because she had done enough today. She turned off the desk lamp. She looked at him. Walk me out, she said. He walked her out. Through the center, past room 3, past the small kitchen, through the front room where Petra had already gone, and the desk was cleared for the night. He held the front door. She stepped through it onto Clement Street. The evening was cool and ordinary. People walking, traffic. The dry cleaner's dark now. The Vietnamese sandwich shop 2 doors down, still lit and doing business. The painted notes on the music center window caught the streetlight and threw small bright shapes onto the sidewalk. Elise stood on the sidewalk and looked up and down the street the way she probably did every evening. The automatic scan of someone who has been the last person out of this building for 11 years and has a particular relationship with this block at this hour. The car is gone, Rowan said. He had checked before he'd gone inside that morning. He had checked again when the session ended. Voss's equipment was cleared from the building across the street this afternoon. I know, Elise said. I saw them carry it out. You watched? From the back window, she said. I watched them carry it out and put it in a van and drive away. She paused. I wanted to see it go. They stood on the sidewalk. The city moved around them with the indifferent, comprehensive energy of a city that does not adjust its pace for the private conclusions of the people inside it. There are going to be months of regulatory process, he said. Things connected to my name are going to be visible for a while, including this. He gestured at the building, at the street, at the general fact of the two of them standing on it. I want you to know that before you, Rowan, she said, before you make any decision about Rowan, her voice was not sharp. It was the voice she used for measure 3. I know what I'm deciding. He stopped. She looked at him with the complete attention that gathered rather than judged. The look that had been the same in every room and every conversation since the first one. The look that he had understood eventually was not a performance of steadiness, but its actual substance. You know what I realized, she said, when I found out the whole story? The staffing agency, the original accompanist, the 8-month operational file. She paused. I realized that what they built a plan around, the gap in you that they identified, was real. They were right about that. There was something in you that responded to a room where the ordinary rules didn't apply. She looked at him. What they didn't plan for was that the response would be real too. You didn't perform anything in this building. I would have seen it. After 11 years, I know what performing looks like. He said, what does it look like? It looks like someone who is almost as good as the thing they're trying to be, she said. It's very close, but the gap is visible if you know where to look. She paused. There was no gap. He stood on the sidewalk in the evening light. He thought about Garrett across the folding table producing a document he had spent 19 years building. He thought about the kitchen at 6 in the morning and the slow, heavy percussion of a heart that had understood something before his mind caught up to it. He thought about 40 chairs and the particular arrangement of a room that told you where the chairs had always gone. He thought about measure 3. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes, she said. The night at the Aldrich Grand, he said, when you handed it back, what were you thinking? She looked at him for a moment. She looked at the painted notes on the window. I was thinking I wanted to get to the piano, she said. There was a crowd and cameras and a man I'd never seen before with a diamond ring and a woman in ivory silk who looked like she was about to do something irreversible, and I had been hired to play Chopin, and I hadn't played it yet. She paused. So I returned the ring, and I played the Chopin. He looked at her. That's it? He said. That's it, she said. He thought about that for a moment. The complete simplicity of it, the absence of drama in her own account of the moment that had been, for everyone else in that room, the most dramatic thing they had witnessed in recent memory. The Chopin, he said. Was it good? She considered this with genuine seriousness. It was better than the situation deserved, she said. Something moved in his face. Not quite a smile, but the visible approach of one, close enough that she recognized it. She said, Tuesday. 2 o'clock, he said. She started walking. He watched her go. Down Clement Street in the evening, her bag over one shoulder, unhurried, past the dry cleaner and the sandwich shop, and the corner where the streetlight had been out for a week and was still out tonight. She did not look back. She walked the way she did everything, with the specific, unadorned intention of someone who knows where she is going and does not require the confirmation of being watched to proceed. He stood on the sidewalk until she turned the corner. Then he stood there for another moment, in front of the building with the painted notes on the glass. In the city that was the same city it had always been, doing what it had always done. He looked at the painted notes. A child had done them. He knew that from the corkboard, from the photograph Petra had on the front desk of a Saturday afternoon when the center was a year old and 11 students had painted the window with musical notes in the cheerful, slightly uneven style of people who are doing something because they love it and not because they are good at it yet. He had looked at that photograph 3 weeks ago and thought about a room that was a year old once, with 11 students and a used upright, and a woman who had decided that closing would mean making a decision from fear and had not closed. He thought about that decision. He thought about the one he had made on a sidewalk in the cold morning light, which had cost what it had cost and was going to keep costing for the better part of the next 2 years, and which he did not regret, and which he would not have revised even with complete foreknowledge of the cost, because the version of himself that would have made a different decision on that sidewalk was the version that could go back to who he had been before he walked into this building. And that version he understood now with the particular clarity of a man who has looked at both options from very close range did not exist anymore. He went back inside. He turned off the front lights. He locked the front door with the key Petra had given him that morning when things were still uncertain and she had decided, with the resigned competence of someone who processes catastrophe by doing the next practical thing, that someone other than Elise should be able to secure the building. He walked back through the center in the dark, past the front desk, past room 1 and room 2, past room 3. He stopped at the door of room 3. He stood in the doorway. The streetlight through the alley window made a rectangle of pale light on the floor beside the old upright. The corkboard was a dark mass in the corner with the gold stars invisible at this distance. The bench had the groove in it that he had worn himself. Over 6 weeks of evenings that had started badly and improved with repetition. He went in. He sat at the piano. He did not turn on the light. He sat in the dark in the old room with the lemon polish smell and the cracked veneer on the upper left corner repaired neatly with wood glue, and he put his hands on the keys, and he played the piece Elise had assigned him on the first Tuesday, the one that had started with both hands fighting and had arrived slowly at something that sounded like both hands doing the same thing. He played it from the beginning, slowly, all the way through. No mistakes. He sat for a moment after the last note. Then he played it again, because that was what you did. You played it again, you came back to it, you made the note until the note was right, and the making was the thing, not the arrival. And you kept going even when you weren't sure yet what you were becoming, because the only alternative was to stop. And stopping was a decision from fear. And he had sat in enough chairs in this building across from people who had refused to let fear be the decision to know what that refusal cost and what it returned. The return was worth it. He played it a third time. In the dark room, on the old piano, with the streetlight making its rectangle on the floor and the city outside doing what cities do, he played it all the way through, and both hands were doing the same thing. And they had been doing the same thing for a while now, and they both knew it. He finished. He sat with his hands in his lap in the quiet room. Then he stood up. He pulled the bench back to its position. He walked to the door. He looked back at the room once. The piano, the corkboard, the rectangle of streetlight, the particular quality of a place that is what it is regardless of who is watching. He turned off nothing because there was no light on. He walked out through the center and out through the alley door into the night, and the door locked behind him. And he walked to his car, and he drove home through the city. And the city was ordinary the entire way, indifferent and comprehensive and entirely itself. And he was something he had not been at the beginning of the drive he had made to Clement Street 6 weeks ago. And the difference between those two things was not, in the end, a story about a ring or an engagement or an empire or an exposure or a woman in ivory silk building operations in a Palm Beach hotel suite. It was a story about a man who sat down at a piano and played a note badly, and played it again, and kept playing it until both his hands finally agreed on what they were doing. That was the whole story. Everything else was what it cost to get there. And the cost, in the end, was the only proof that the